In the chaotic final months of World War II, as the Third Reich collapsed under the weight of its own brutality, a new conflict emerged, quiet, invisible, and far more strategic. It wasn't a battle fought with tanks, aircraft, or infantry. It was a battle for minds, for knowledge, for the scientists who carried in their notebooks and memories ideas capable of reshaping the future of warfare, global power, and the survival of entire nations. This battle would become known as Operation Paperclip, one of the most secretive and controversial programs in American history, a program designed to bring Nazi scientists to the United States, not to face trial, but to build rockets, chemical weapons, intelligence technologies, and the foundations of the Cold War arms race. This is the full story, a story of moral compromise, government secrecy, scientific genius, and the terrifying power of knowledge in the hands of desperate nations. Chapter 1. The race for Bahrain-INSB. Early 1945. It was clear to the Allied forces that Nazi Germany was finished. Cities were in ruins. Factories lay silent. Soviet and American troops were advancing on all fronts. But even as the military structure collapsed, something else remained intact: Germany's scientific and technological elite. The Nazis had invested enormous resources into experimental research, rocketry, aerodynamics, nerve agents, aviation medicine, cryptography, ballistics, radar, submarine technology, even early forms of computing. Many of the world's leading scientists worked under the Third Reich, willingly or unwillingly, driving innovation at a pace unmatched by any other nation at the time. Both the United States and the Soviet Union understood that whoever captured these scientists first would gain a strategic advantage for decades to come. This realization marked the beginning of a covert competition, a race not for land, but for intellect. Not for cities, but for laboratories. The Americans called their mission Operation Overcast, soon renamed Operation Paperclip, after the paperclips used to attach secret dossiers to the files of scientists who were to be brought into the United States. The Soviets had their own operation, Operation Osoaviakim, a sweeping effort to seize scientists, engineers, and their families, often by force, in the ruins of Germany. The Cold War had already begun. Chapter 2. Wernher von Braun. The prize of the CNTURY among the countless scientists scattered across the remains of the Reich. One name stood above everyone else: Wernher von Braun, the young, charismatic rocket engineer who had designed the V-2 rocket, the world's first long-range ballistic missile. The V-2 was a terrifying weapon, could cross the English Channel at supersonic speed, strike without warning, and kill thousands. But beyond its destructive power, the V-2 represented something more visionary, the first technological step toward the future of space travel. Von Braun dreamed of sending humans to the moon and beyond. But during the war, his dreams had been reshaped into instruments of terror. As Allied forces closed in, von Braun and his team realized they were valuable bargaining chips. If they surrendered to the Soviets, they risked disappearing into remote research camps. If they surrendered to the Americans, they saw a chance to continue their work and perhaps escape prosecution for crimes committed in the pursuit of Nazi weaponry. Von Braun ordered his team to gather documents, blueprints, prototypes, and research materials and hide them in a mine shaft in the Harz Mountains. Then, in May 1945, he and 120 of his best engineers surrendered to the United States. It was a turning point in history. Chapter 3. The moral dilemma when U.S. intelligence officers first reviewed the records of the German scientists, they were confronted with a disturbing reality. Many of these men had been loyal members of the Nazi Party. Some had used slave labor. Some had overseen experiments that violated every moral and scientific principle imaginable. Bringing them to the United States posed enormous ethical and political challenges. On one hand, their knowledge was invaluable. On the other, their pasts were dark, often criminal. The U.S. government made its choice. They created a system to sanitize these scientists' records, downplay their Nazi affiliations, and erase anything that could cause public outrage. Documents were altered, files were hidden, Paperclips were attached to marked folders, indicating which scientists were to be protected. In an era where global survival seemed at stake, moral concerns were pushed aside in favor of national security. Chapter 4. The secret transfer. In late 1945, the first group of Nazi scientists was quietly transported to the United States. They arrived anonymously under classified military arrangements, often with forged personal histories provided by American intelligence. Some were taken to the White Sands Proving Ground in New Mexico. Others were stationed at Fort Bliss, Texas, and later at Redstone Arsenal, Alabama. Their task was simple: rebuild and enhance the Nazi rocket program for America. Under their guidance, the U.S. Army tested V-2 rockets, developed new propulsion systems, and laid the foundation for what would eventually become NASA. The outside world, the scientists were portrayed as foreign experts helping post-war American research. Their Nazi pasts were buried beneath layers of documents, lies, and bureaucratic misdirection. Chapter 5. NASA and the Space Race. In 1958, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration (NASA) was created in response to the Soviet launch of Sputnik, the first artificial satellite. Suddenly, the United States found itself trailing behind. The Cold War was no longer limited to land or sea. It had moved into space. NASA needed experienced rocket engineers. Many of them were already in America, working quietly behind classified doors. Wernher von Braun became the director of NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center. His team developed the Saturn V rocket, the massive launch vehicle that would send the first humans to the moon in 1969. For the U.S. government, Operation Paperclip had been a success. For historians, it raised troubling questions. Were the achievements of American space exploration built on the knowledge of men who once served a murderous regime? And if so, what did that mean for the moral foundation of the nation's greatest scientific triumph? Chapter 6. Chemical Weapons and Biological. RESERCH. While the rocket scientists became famous, many other paperclip recruits worked in complete secrecy, far from the public eye. Among them were Otto Ambros, a chemist who had helped develop the nerve agents tabun and sarin; Walter Schreiber, a physician involved in military medical projects; a Hubertus Strughold, often called the father of space medicine, who had conducted high-altitude and freezing experiments on prisoners. These men were quietly integrated into American research programs involving chemical warfare, biological agents, and aerospace medicine. Their knowledge was seen as too valuable to ignore, even though some had been linked to horrific human experiments in concentration camps. Declassified documents later revealed how the U.S. bypassed ethical considerations by rebranding these scientists, clearing their records, and shielding them from prosecution in exchange for their expertise. Operation Paperclip was no longer just a scientific effort, it was a moral gamble. Chapter 7. The Soviet RESPONSE. While the United States was recruiting German scientists through secret agreements, the Soviet Union was pursuing its strategy with brutal efficiency. During Operation Osoaviakim in October 1946, Soviet forces raided German scientific districts, abducting over 2,000 specialists along with their families, equipment, and laboratories. They were relocated to the Soviet Union, often without warning, and put to work on Soviet weapons and space programs. This forced migration intensified the Cold War technological rivalry. Both superpowers were now advancing on the backs of German research teams. But while the Soviet program remained largely isolated and controlled, the American scientists gradually integrated into the U.S. academic and military infrastructure, where their influence would last for decades. Chapter 8. The Legacy. And the truth be, the end of the 20th century, Operation Paperclip had shaped the modern world in profound ways. The U.S. space program owes much of its early success to former Nazi engineers. The development of American missile systems, including intercontinental ballistic missiles, was heavily influenced by German technology. Chemical and biological research programs drew directly from Nazi experiments. Cold War intelligence agencies were guided by insights provided by former Nazi specialists. For decades, the program remained shrouded in secrecy. Documents were classified, Names were concealed. Public records were altered. It wasn't until the 1980s and 1990s, after a wave of declassifications, that the full scale of Operation Paperclip became known. Historians were left to wrestle with difficult questions. Could the United States have advanced its technological and military capabilities without using scientists with unethical pasts? Was justice sacrificed for security? And is it possible to separate scientific contribution from moral responsibility? Chapter 9. A program built on. Tradiction. Operation Paperclip remains one of the most controversial initiatives in American history because it exists at the intersection of necessity and ethics. On one side, the Cold War demanded rapid technological advancement. On the other, these advancements came from individuals connected to atrocities. Many. Operation Paperclip symbolizes the willingness of governments to compromise their moral foundations in the face of geopolitical threats. Others. It represents a pragmatic, if uncomfortable, decision that reshaped global science and helped win the Cold War. The truth lies somewhere between these extremes. Operation Paperclip is a story of ambition, secrecy, intelligence, and the high price paid when nations decide that the ends justify the means. It is a reminder that progress often comes with shadows, and that history is shaped not only by victories on the battlefield, but by decisions made in hidden rooms, sealed archives, and classified programs. In the end, Operation Paperclip forces us to confront the uncomfortable reality that some of humanity's greatest achievements were built on foundations of moral complexity, and that even in the pursuit of progress, the past is never truly left behind.